Chapter 6: Propaganda and Mass Influence. 6.1 The History of Propaganda in Politics and War. Propaganda, as a tool of influence, has been meticulously crafted and utilized throughout history, particularly in the realms of politics and war. It can be described as information, often of a biased or misleading nature, employed to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. The origins of propaganda can be traced back to ancient civilizations, where it served as a means to influence public opinion, justify rulers' actions, or bolster wartime morale. The history of propaganda is deeply intertwined with the development of mass communication, each new medium expanding the reach and sophistication of this elusive instrument. The term propaganda itself originated from the Congregation of Propaganda, a group established by the Catholic Church in the 17th century to propagate the Catholic faith in non-Catholic countries. Over time, the concept of propaganda expanded beyond religious contexts, becoming a key element in the political machinations of statecraft. Governments began to understand the power of persuasive messages in shaping public opinion and controlling the narrative, particularly during times of conflict. Propaganda became an integral part of the state apparatus, often indistinguishable from other forms of political communication. During World War I, propaganda efforts reached an unprecedented scale with the advent of new technologies like radio broadcasting and cinema. Countries involved in the war invested heavily in propaganda agencies to manipulate public opinion and sustain support for the war effort. Aggressive poster campaigns, patriotic speeches, and orchestrated news reports were designed to dehumanize the enemy, rally national pride, and suppress dissent. This period marked the realization that public sentiment could be manufactured, and that consent could be engineered by controlling the flow of information. The interwar period saw the refinement of propaganda techniques, as political leaders like Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin employed propaganda as an instrument of totalitarian control. The Nazi regime's Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, led by Joseph Goebbels, mastered the use of media for its insidious objectives. Propaganda was no longer just a wartime expedient, it was a perpetual presence, shaping the attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions of the populace. In the Soviet Union, propaganda was used to forge a cult of personality around Stalin and to further the goals of the state, reinforcing the tenets of communist ideology. World War II was perhaps the zenith of propagandist endeavor, where every facet of the war effort was permeated with an intent to shape psychology and opinion. During this time, propagandists on all sides honed their craft, pushing the boundaries of persuasion. Allied powers used propaganda not only to vilify the Axis enemies, but also to maintain alliances and encourage resilience among their own citizens. Techniques included the strategic use of radio broadcasts to transcend borders and the dropping of leaflets to undermine enemy morale. After the war, the revelations of the Holocaust and the extent of Nazi propaganda's role in fostering genocide underscored the pernicious effects of unbridled persuasive communication. The Cold War era brought with it a new plane for propaganda. The ideological battle between the capitalist West and the communist East played out not only in the corridors of power, but also in the arena of public opinion. Propaganda became more subtle, often couched in terms of cultural diplomacy, educational exchanges, and international broadcasting. The United States and the Soviet Union developed sophisticated campaigns aimed at promoting their respective ways of life and discrediting the opposition. It was during this period that the term propaganda began to acquire its more negative connotations, being associated with manipulation and deceit. In contemporary times, the channels of propaganda have multiplied with the proliferation of the internet and social media platforms. The democratization of information has paradoxically facilitated the spread of state-sponsored propaganda, as well as non-state actors who seek to sway public opinion. The rise of fake news, algorithm-driven content delivery, and targeted advertising has created an environment where propaganda can be disseminated more rapidly and with greater precision. These new tools have afforded propagandists the ability to manipulate narratives on a scale previously unimaginable, indicating that the evolution of propaganda is an ongoing process. The history of propaganda in politics and war reveals a complex tapestry of influence and manipulation. From ancient times to the digital age, the use of propaganda has mirrored advancements in communication technology and shifts in political power dynamics. In war, it has been a weapon as potent as any wielded on the battlefields; in politics, a tool for shaping the fabric of society. The potency of propaganda lies in its ability to appeal to emotions, bypass critical thinking, and exploit human cognitive biases. As our understanding of persuasion and psychology deepens, so too does our insight into the mechanisms of propaganda. It is worth noting that while propaganda can have deleterious effects, similar techniques can be employed for benevolent purposes, such as public health campaigns or raising awareness of social issues. However, the line between influence and manipulation is often thin and requires constant scrutiny. The democratization of access to information presents both challenges and opportunities in mitigating the impact of deleterious propaganda while harnessing the positive potential of persuasive communication for the common good. In conclusion, the history of propaganda in politics and war is an essential study for anyone seeking to understand the undercurrents that shape global events and public mentality. As we navigate an era where the distinction between fact and fiction is increasingly blurred, a critical examination of propaganda's historical trajectory offers valuable insights into how information can be used as a tool for both control and enlightenment. It underscores the need for vigilance and media literacy in contemporary society, where the manipulation of minds remains as prevalent and persuasive as ever. 6.2 Identifying modern propaganda techniques. Propaganda is a form of communication aimed primarily at influencing the opinions or behavior of people, rather than impartially providing information. It involves the spreading of ideas, information, or rumors for the purpose of helping or harming an institution, a cause, or a person. Recognizing modern propaganda techniques is crucial in a world where information is rapidly disseminated, and the line between facts and fabricated content can often be blurred. This section outlines various strategies employed in contemporary propaganda, offering readers a framework to identify and understand these tactics. The first modern propaganda technique is the use of loaded language. This strategy involves selecting words and phrases with strong emotional implications to influence an audience's perception. Loaded language can provoke an emotional response and often carries connotations that are not necessarily based on fact. Such language is typically used to create a sense of urgency or to disparage opposing viewpoints without logical justification. When encountering emotionally charged vocabulary, it is vital to distinguish between objective information and the speaker's intention to manipulate feelings. Another prevalent technique is the bandwagon approach, which exploits the human tendency to conform to groups. Propagandists using this approach will suggest that adopting a certain opinion or action is the norm, and hence desirable. They create an illusion of widespread support to pressure individuals into following the crowd. This is often seen in advertising and political campaigns, where the popularity of a product or ideology is emphasized over its actual merits. Being aware of this approach can aid individuals in making decisions based on their own inquiries rather than a fabricated consensus. The use of glittering generalities is a closely related propaganda method, which involves the application of vague, highly valued concepts such as freedom, honor, and love. These abstract terms are used in a positive context, encouraging the audience to approve something without examining the evidence. Glittering generalities lack specific details and context, making it essential for individuals to seek out more substantial information before forming an opinion. Cult of personality is a technique that focuses on creating an idealized image of a leader, often portraying them as a heroic figure. By concentrating on the personal characteristics of a leader, rather than their policies or the implications of their actions, this approach can often persuade the public to support them, based solely on their persona. In this form of propaganda, critical discussion regarding a leader's competence or policies is frequently bypassed or discouraged. Recognizing the difference between an individual's character and their suitability for leadership is a fundamental step in resisting this technique. Fear is also used as a tool in modern propaganda, commonly known as the appeal to fear or fearmongering. It is a strategy that involves conveying dire warnings or threatening consequences if certain actions are not taken or if certain beliefs are not adopted. By fostering a sense of fear, the propagandist can persuade people to act in ways that they might not otherwise consider rational. Discerning fear-based appeals and requiring evidence to substantiate the claimed dangers can mitigate the effectiveness of this technique. Another sophisticated propaganda method is selective omissions, where certain facts or aspects of information are deliberately excluded to shape the audience's perception. By providing only a partial picture, propagandists can distort reality and lead people to draw conclusions that support their agenda. This method depends on the audience's passive reception of information. A critical approach, seeking comprehensive data and different viewpoints, is necessary to identify and overcome selective omissions. Repetition is one of the simplest yet most powerful propaganda techniques. By repeating a message frequently, it becomes more familiar and is thus more likely to be accepted as truth. This psychological phenomenon is known as the illusory truth effect. Repetition can embed ideas in the public consciousness, making it essential to recognize the difference between familiar and factual when evaluating repeated messages. Transfer is a technique that involves associating a respected symbol or idea with something a propagandist wishes to promote. For example, using the flag in an advertisement suggests patriotism and can transfer positive feelings toward a product or idea. This association may not be logically supported, but can influence perceptions by linking emotions related to one object with another. Critical thinking can identify such dubious connections between symbols and the ideas they are meant to endorse. Testimonials are another common tool where a public figure, celebrity, or authority endorses a product, cause, or policy. Their support is meant to convince the audience of the value or validity of the proposition. However, the expertise and relevance of these individuals to the topic at hand are often questionable. It is therefore necessary to assess the credibility and motive of the person providing a testimonial. Finally, the card stacking technique involves presenting only the arguments that support a particular position while ignoring or discrediting opposing viewpoints. This creates a biased impression of an issue as one-sided. To counter this, one should scrutinize the missing counterarguments and seek information from a variety of sources, thereby ensuring a more balanced and informed understanding of the topic. Modern propaganda techniques vary widely but share the goal of influencing public opinion, often through less than transparent means. Being able to recognize and understand these methods is the first step toward maintaining autonomy in our thoughts and actions. Armed with this knowledge, individuals are better equipped to dissect the information presented to them and make decisions based on critical reasoning rather than emotional manipulation or incomplete data. 6.3. Media literacy, understanding bias and source credibility. Media literacy constitutes the skills and competencies necessary to critically engage with media content. It involves the ability to understand the nature of media as a construct and the underlying messages conveyed, whether overtly or covertly. In this section, we will delve into the ways in which media literacy can equip individuals to discern bias and evaluate source credibility, both of which are essential for navigating the complex world of mass communication and resisting undue influence. A core component of media literacy is recognizing bias. Bias in media can manifest in multiple dimensions, including, but not limited to political, cultural, religious, or corporate interests. To detect bias, one must first understand that all media content is curated and presented through a particular lens. This process often entails the selection and omission of certain facts, the use of specific language, and framing issues in a manner that could influence public perception. Distinguishing between fact and opinion within this content is a crucial skill, as bias is most commonly communicated through the expression of opinion, while facts are universal and verifiable. Another angle of perceiving bias is examining the source itself. This includes understanding the ownership of the media outlet, the funding sources, and any affiliations or alliances it may have. Companies, political parties, or interest groups that own or sponsor media platforms can affect the objectivity of the information relayed. Stakeholders often have the power to sway editorial directions or prioritize stories that align with their agendas. Thus, evaluating who owns or funds a media source can provide insights into potential biases. Source credibility is another vital aspect of media literacy. It refers to the perceived trustworthiness and expertise of the source providing the information. Credible sources are typically characterized by their expertise in the subject matter, their reputation for accuracy and reliability, and their adherence to ethical standards of reporting, such as accountability and transparency. In evaluating credibility, one looks at the author or creator's credentials, their past work, and the corroborative evidence supporting the information provided. It is also important to consider the peer review process or any other verification mechanisms that add to the credibility of a source. With the advent of digital media, the verification of source credibility has become both more challenging and more crucial. The Internet is replete with information, but not all of it is credible. The ease of publishing online has allowed unverified and potentially biased information to proliferate, often blurring the lines between reputable journalism and content designed to mislead or propagandize. To counteract this, media literacy advocates for a careful examination of the domain, the design and professionalism of the website, the writing style, and the presence of citations and supporting documents. Cross-referencing information is an effective method to test the veracity of a source. By consulting multiple sources and comparing how a subject is reported across them, one can gauge the reliability of the information and gain a broader perspective. This is especially important in cases where one source might present an outlier position. Media-literate individuals approach information with a degree of skepticism and actively seek to substantiate claims, recognizing that consensus among multiple credible sources is often indicative of well-founded information. The role of confirmation bias cannot be ignored when discussing media literacy. Confirmation bias is the tendency to favor information that confirms pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Individuals may selectively gather, recall, or interpret information in a way that substantiates their own views. Media literacy aims to mitigate the effects of confirmation bias by encouraging diverse media consumption and engaging with information that challenges one's preconceptions. This helps to foster a more rounded understanding and counteracts the echo chamber effect that can perpetuate distorted perceptions of reality. Understanding the strategies that influence content creation is also part of media literacy. Various persuasive techniques, such as the use of loaded language, emotional appeals, false dilemmas, and the bandwagon effect, can be employed to shape attitudes and behaviors. Recognizing these tactics helps individuals to engage with media more thoughtfully and to see beyond the surface level of communication. In assessing arguments and claims made by the media-literate persons evaluate the logic and evidence presented rather than being swayed by rhetorical devices. In the modern age, interactivity and user-generated content contribute to the complexity of media literacy. Social media platforms allow users not only to consume content, but also to create and disseminate it. This presents challenges in distinguishing between professional and amateur content, as well as understanding the algorithms that dictate what content is displayed to users. Media literacy, therefore, encompasses an awareness of how user interactions and feedback loops influence what becomes prominent online, and how this can create a skewed representation of public opinion or popularity. Teaching media literacy involves educating about the responsibilities that come with media consumption and creation. While individuals have the right to express themselves and access a diverse range of viewpoints, there is also a responsibility to be critical thinkers and responsible communicators. In the digital world where misinformation can spread rapidly, it becomes a civic duty to verify information before sharing it, and to combat the spread of falsehoods by promoting accurate, reliable content. 6.4 The role of repetition in belief formation. Repetition is a fundamental element of propaganda that plays a critical role in belief formation among individuals and masses. The concept of repeating a message over and over is rooted in the idea that frequent exposure to a particular statement or idea increases the likeliness of its acceptance as truth. This persistence in communication relies on the psychological phenomenon known as the mere exposure effect, which asserts that people tend to develop a preference for things merely because they are familiar with them. When applied to messages, this means repetitive exposure can make an idea seem more credible over time, regardless of its objective truth or falsity. Information that is repeated often can create a sense of familiarity and trust, leading individuals to accept the information with minimal critical scrutiny. When a message is encountered repeatedly, it can bypass rational evaluation and instead be accepted based on the recognition and comfort with the repeated content. This is perilously effective in the context of propaganda, as psychologically, human beings are predisposed to associate repetition with truthfulness. This cognitive bias suggests that if something is stated often enough, it is perceived as more valid or important. The role of repetition in belief formation is further cemented by the understanding that human memory favors repeated information when it comes to retrieval. The illusory truth effect indicates that repeated statements are more easily processed and thus more likely to be remembered. This is why slogans, jingles, and catchphrases are deeply embedded in propaganda strategies. They are designed to be easily remembered and to reinforce the intended message every time they are recalled or recognized. For instance, political campaigns oftentimes construct simple, repetitive slogans that align with their agenda to reinforce the message among potential voters. However, repetition in belief formation is not merely about the frequency of the message, but also about the variety of sources and contexts in which it is presented. When the same narrative is disseminated across multiple platforms, such as news outlets, social media, and public discourse, the perception of its legitimacy is enhanced. The convergence of various sources reiterating the same idea can create an echo chamber effect where dissenting opinions are drowned out, and the repeated message becomes a dominant narrative. This can lead to a significant influence on public opinion and even shift societal norms. Propagandists have long understood the power of repetition in shaping beliefs and have exploited it to influence audiences. They rely on repetitive messaging to simplify complex ideas into digestible and memorable bits of information that resonate with a wider audience. This technique is particularly useful when trying to instill ideologies or persuade the public during times of political unrest or social change. Even in commercial advertising, repetition is used to instill brand awareness and loyalty. By consistently encountering the same product or brand name, consumers are more inclined to choose the familiar option. The effective use of repetition in belief formation also depends on the emotional response it elicits. Emotional engagement, whether positive or negative, can act as a catalyst that intensifies the retention of the repeated message. By creating a strong emotional reaction, be it fear, anger, or joy, the message is more likely to be internalized and accepted as true. This is often evident in wartime propaganda, where messaging aims to elicit a strong emotional response to unite the populace against a common enemy or in support of a national cause. The importance of timing can't be understated in the role of repetition for persuasive messaging. Repeating a message too frequently in a short span of time can lead to annoyance and resistance, whereas spacing out repetitions can keep the message fresh and maintain audience attention. The psychological principle behind this is known as the spacing effect, which indicates that information is more effectively encoded into memory when repetitions are spread out over time. It is also crucial to consider the content of the message being repeated. For repetition to successfully influence beliefs, the message itself must have some initial appeal or relevance to the audience. If the core message is not of interest, no amount of repetition will make it persuasive. Therefore, propagandists often tailor messages to their audience's pre-existing beliefs or values, making the repetitive message more acceptable and easier to adopt. In the digital age, the role of repetition in belief formation has become even more pronounced. The advent of social media and algorithms tailored to user preferences means individuals are more likely to encounter repetitive content aligned with their existing beliefs. This self-reinforcing cycle can limit exposure to diverse viewpoints and contribute to the polarization of beliefs. The repetitive nature of online content, whether true or false, amplifies its influence on individual and collective belief systems. Understanding the role of repetition in belief formation is crucial not only for those who aim to employ persuasive strategies, but also for those who wish to maintain a critical perspective in the face of persistent messaging. An informed awareness of these dynamics allows one to better discern the intentions behind repeated messages and to evaluate them with a more critical lens. Encountering repeated information thus becomes more than an exercise in familiarity. It becomes an opportunity for critical analysis and informed decision-making. Repetition is more than a rhetorical tool. It is a potent force in shaping what individuals and societies come to accept as truth. The repeated message, circulated through various channels and over time, has the power to transform uncertainties into certainties and marginal ideas into mainstream beliefs. It is essential, however, to recognize that with the power to influence comes the responsibility to use such influence ethically. As such, understanding the power and role of repetition in belief formation is imperative for creating a more discerning and resilient society. 6.5 Manufactured consent and the illusion of choice. The concept of manufactured consent refers to the strategic use of mass media and propaganda to shape public perception and create the illusion that the populace is making an informed, autonomous decision, when in fact they are being subtly coerced. This term was popularized by Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman, who posited that democratic societies, particularly those with strategically structured media markets, utilize a spectrum of coercion that is less about overt force and more about subconscious or systemic manipulation. In this environment, the illusion of choice is critical. It maintains the facade of a free and open society while actually guiding individuals toward predetermined outcomes. At its most effective, manufactured consent operates through the narrowing of media discourse. In practice, this means a limited number of viewpoints are presented as the entirety of the debate, effectively excluding radical or alternative perspectives. This false dichotomy ensures that the conversation takes place within a confined intellectual space that is acceptable to the dominant power structure. For the public, this creates a sense of participating in a diverse discourse, while in reality, the scope of discussion is constricted to ideas that ultimately uphold the status quo. This phenomenon relies heavily on the sources of information to which the public has access. Mainstream media outlets often draw from the same pool of experts who convey messages that align with the interests of those in power, be it political or corporate. These experts provide commentary that appears impartial or based on consensus, though they often represent a narrow band of opinion that coincides with corporate or governmental interests. As a result, the public is nudged toward consensus within this restricted frame, thus believing that they are making informed decisions independently of external manipulation. Branding plays a crucial role in creating the illusion of choice as well. By differentiating products or political candidates through superficial attributes, while substantively they remain very similar, a sense of competition is fabricated. For instance, the distinctions between major political parties may be amplified in public rhetoric, yet their policies may overlap significantly, especially on issues related to economic and foreign policy. Similarly, in markets with a small number of competitors, minor differences between products are exaggerated to evoke brand loyalty, despite the underlying similarities between options. Advertising and public relations are two of the primary tools used to shape public perception and create an illusion of choice. Through these mechanisms, messages are crafted to appeal to emotions, often bypassing rational analysis. The repetition of these messages can lead to acceptance and belief, as continuous exposure to a particular narrative builds familiarity and trust. This trust in the message is conflated with trust in the choice it represents, despite whether alternatives exist or are realistically accessible. An essential aspect of this process is the preemptive framing of issues. By introducing and defining an issue in the public consciousness in a certain way, media outlets and other agents of influence constrain the potential responses. Take, for example, a debate over healthcare reform. If the debate is framed as choosing between moderate adjustments to the existing system or maintaining the status quo, more transformative changes are sidelined, not because they lack public support necessarily, but because they have been dismissed from the outset as unrealistic or radical. A less recognized but equally significant component of manufactured consent is the role of education and the shaping of acceptable knowledge. Educational systems can reinforce existing power structures by promulgating a version of history and civics that supports the legitimacy of those structures. Furthermore, they can limit critical thinking by focusing on rote learning and test-taking skills over independent thought and inquiry. When educational institutions limit the breadth of perspectives and debate, they prepare individuals to fit into the manufactured consensus of public discourse. The repetitive nature of messaging in media also ensures that opposition to consensual views appears fringe or even dangerous. When alternative views are presented, they are often done so in a context that marginalizes their validity or associates them with extremism. In that way, the center of the debate is artificially maintained, and deviations from it are both socially and intellectually discouraged. As an effect, self-censorship becomes common as individuals internalize the boundaries of acceptable thought and adjust their expressed opinions accordingly. One of the most significant implications of manufactured consent is the passivity it engenders within the populace. As the process ingrains a narrow range of acceptable ideas and the illusion of informed choice, the impetus for active participation in the political process is weakened. Believing that they are already engaged in a democratic debate and that their choices have real influence, people may be less likely to seek out dissenting information or to question the underpinnings of the choices presented to them. The Internet age has complicated the scenario of manufactured consent by introducing a wider array of information sources. While this could be seen as a challenge to traditional media's ability to shape consensus, the overwhelming amount of information available online can paradoxically reinforce it. Information overload can lead to a reliance on familiar sources or algorithms that create a filter bubble, thus limiting exposure to diverse viewpoints. Furthermore, the illusion of choice proliferates online as users are given the impression of a vast landscape of perspectives, when in fact search engines and social media often tailor content that reinforces existing beliefs. To navigate the terrain of manufactured consent, critical media literacy is indispensable. This entails not only skepticism towards the sources of information, but also an active effort to seek out and consider a range of perspectives. Particularly in an era marked by both information excess and sophisticated persuasion techniques, the ability of individuals to discern the manipulation of choice becomes more vital than ever before. Democratic societies must strive to ensure that their citizens are equipped with the tools to understand and critique the mechanisms that seek to channel their perceptions and choices. 6.6 Symbolism and Myth Creation in Mass Influence. When discussing propaganda and mass influence, the importance of symbolism and myth creation cannot be underestimated. Symbols serve as a shorthand way to communicate complex ideas, emotions, and values, often bypassing rational thought and eliciting an emotional response. The power of symbols lies in their ability to be interpreted in various ways by different people, yet still evoke a collective understanding or feeling. This flexibility makes symbols a potent tool for mass influence, where a broad audience with varying perceptions can be aligned under a common narrative or goal through the strategic use of emblematic imagery or motifs. A symbol can represent an ideology, movement, or nation, and it can unify or polarize populations based on its portrayal and interpretation. Myths, on the other hand, serve as the narrative foundation that organizes and gives meaning to these symbols. Myths are not just ancient stories, but also contemporary narratives that shape our perception of reality. They often embody the values and beliefs of a culture, providing a shared story that people can identify with and rally around. In the context of mass influence, myth creation is a deliberate process of crafting a narrative that resonates with the larger population's hopes, fears, and aspirations. Myths provide the framework within which symbols operate. They contextualize symbols and give them a narrative power that can be harnessed to direct public perception and action. One of the key functions of myth creation in mass influence is to simplify complex issues. By embedding symbols within a larger, often emotionally charged narrative, myths can reduce the nuances of a situation to a more digestible and memorable form. This simplification helps people to quickly understand and relate to issues without the need for in-depth analysis or understanding. It can foster a sense of unity and purpose as the myth becomes a rallying point for collective action or belief. However, this simplification also opens the door for manipulation, as the subtleties and complexities of the true situation may be lost or intentionally obscured. Symbolism in myth creation become particularly impactful in mass influence campaigns when they are consistently reinforced. Repetition is a critical component in ensuring that a particular symbol or myth becomes cemented in the public consciousness. For example, a symbol repeated across various media, from print to online platforms, helps to establish that symbol as a recognized representation of specific ideas or causes. Similarly, the repeated telling of a myth, whether through speeches, movies, advertising, or news, can ingrain the narrative so deeply that it becomes accepted as truth, or at least an unquestioned norm within society. Symbols and myths are also given power by authority figures and institutions. When those in positions of power endorse certain symbols or propagate certain myths, they lend the weight of their credibility to those constructs. This endorsement can be explicit, as in the case of a political leader publicly aligning with a particular symbol, or it can be more subtle, such as through the implied support of a culturally influential institution. The approval of respected authorities accelerates the acceptance and propagation of symbols and myths within a society. The use of symbolism and myth creation in mass influence has a direct implication on identity formation among individuals and groups. Symbols and myths can help shape a person's self-concept and their understanding of their place within a larger community or nation. This is often observed in nationalistic movements, where the flag becomes a symbol of national pride, and the founding myths of a nation serve to create a shared sense of identity and destiny among its citizens. Through the careful curation of symbols and stories, mass influence campaigns can have a lasting impact on personal and collective identities. Moreover, the emotional resonance of symbols and myths cannot be overstressed. Humans are emotional beings, and the emotional appeal of certain imagery or narratives is a powerful motivator. Symbols and myths tap into our emotional responses such as fear, pride, or hope to drive behavior or reinforce beliefs. This emotional connection can be more persuasive than factual arguments, making symbols and myths vital tools in influencing public opinion and behavior. For instance, patriotic symbolism can evoke pride and loyalty, often overriding critical assessment of the policies associated with such symbols. Despite the power of symbols and myths to unite, they can also be wielded to divide. Propaganda that uses these tools can exploit existing societal fractures, deepen distrust, and polarize communities. By crafting myths that emphasize an us versus them narrative and using symbols to represent perceived enemies or threats, those who seek to manipulate public opinion can foster division and conflict. This divisive use of symbolism and myth is particularly dangerous, as it can legitimize discrimination, justify violence, and undermine the social fabric of a society. In modern times, the rapid advancement of technology and the proliferation of media channels have magnified the influence of symbols and myths. Social media platforms have become hotbeds for the dissemination and reinforcement of these constructs. The shareable and viral nature of online content allows for the rapid spread of symbols and myths, reaching and influencing vast audiences at an unprecedented pace. Moreover, the echo chamber effect, where individuals are exposed primarily to information that aligns with their existing beliefs, can reinforce and amplify the impact of selective symbols and myths. The ethical considerations surrounding the use of symbolism and myth in mass influence are complex. While they can be used to inspire and unite people for positive causes, they can also be exploited to deceive and manipulate. It is important for those involved in communication, media, and education to maintain an awareness of the power symbols and myths hold, and to strive for transparency and truthfulness in their use. Recognizing the potential for both inspirational and malicious use of these tools is crucial in safeguarding against their misuse and in understanding their role in shaping society. Symbolism and myth creation play a critical role in mass influence, wielding the power to shape public perception and behavior. Their impact on simplifying complex issues, cementing collective identities, and evoking emotional responses makes them indispensable in the arsenal of propaganda. However, their power must be acknowledged and handled with care, as their misuse can lead to societal divisiveness and manipulation. As society continues to evolve with technological advances, the way symbols and myths are propagated and their effects on the masses will remain a topic of significant importance. 6.7 The use of fear and nationalism in propaganda. Propaganda is a potent tool in shaping public opinion, particularly when it employs fear and nationalism. Fear, as a driving force, can override rational thinking, compelling individuals to conform to specific ideologies or actions out of a desire for security or self-preservation. Nationalism, characterized by a strong identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, can enhance this effect. When propaganda intertwines these two elements, it creates a powerful psychological cocktail that can mobilize societies behind a common cause, often justifying extreme measures. This method of influence has been evident throughout history and remains prevalent in modern-day information campaigns. The use of fear in propaganda often involves highlighting external threats that may be exaggerated or even fabricated. These threats are presented in such a way that the targeted audience perceives an imminent danger to their well-being or their way of life. The constant repetition of these threats through multiple media channels ensures that the message of fear is ingrained in the collective consciousness. By keeping the population in a state of anxiety, propagandists can achieve greater control and discourage critical examination of the messages being disseminated. This control maximizes the effectiveness of the propaganda campaign. Nationalism serves as a unifying force within propaganda by appealing to the audience's pride in their country or heritage. This sentiment resonates deeply with many people, as it taps into their sense of belonging and identity. When propaganda connects nationalism to the narrative of fear, it often suggests that the nation is under threat, and that only through unity and robust action can this existential threat be countered. Consequently, nationalism becomes not merely an abstract feeling of patriotism, but a call to action against perceived enemies of the state, whether they are external or internal. The combination of fear and nationalism can drive individuals and groups to support policies or leaders that they might otherwise question. By instilling a sense of emergency and portraying the nation's survival as dependent on specific measures, propaganda can lead to the suppression of dissent and the surrender of personal freedoms. These circumstances can be seen in times of war, during which citizens are often willing to accept stringent restrictions for the sake of national security. In peacetime, fear can still be manipulated to justify actions against internal groups labeled as threats to national integrity or culture. This technique is also effective in facilitating the dehumanization of the other, that is, the entity or group represented as the foe. When propaganda succeeds in convincing the populace that these others are not only different, but also dangerous, it becomes easier to justify harsh policies against them. The narrative that taps into fear and nationalism needs an adversary, and this process of vilification can foster environments where discrimination, prejudice, and xenophobia flourish. In this way, propaganda divides society into us and them, with the latter being the target of suspicion and animosity. An essential aspect of using fear in propaganda is the simplification of complex issues. By presenting problems in black and white terms, propagandists can invoke fear more effectively. The lack of nuance encourages a sense of urgency and prevents the audience from seeing alternative perspectives or solutions. This tactic can be particularly insidious when addressing subjects like economic downturns or public health crises, where complex factors are reduced to simplistic narratives that ascribe blame to specific entities or groups, thereby inciting public ire and rallying support for specific agendas. The employment of symbolism within propaganda is another strategy used to stoke nationalistic feelings. Flags, anthems, and cultural icons evoke strong emotional responses and can be used to reinforce the severity of the purported threat to the nation. Such symbols often accompany messages designed to invoke pride and loyalty, alongside the fear of losing the nation's heritage or position. Thus, symbols become rallying points where fear and nationalism come together, serving as visual and auditory hooks for the propaganda's overarching message. Another dimension of propaganda capitalizing on fear and nationalism is the mythologization of history. Propaganda can rewrite or distort historical events to promote a narrative that supports current political ends. This rewriting serves multiple purposes. It defines the nation's identity, underscores the heroism and sacrifice of the ancestors, and teaches lessons about the enemy's alleged persistent malevolence. In times of crisis or uncertainty, these revised histories offer a sense of continuity and purpose, implying that the nation's current struggles are part of a larger, noble journey. Social pressure is an underlying force that amplifies the impact of fear and nationalism in propaganda. People who might resist the messages of propaganda individually can find it difficult to maintain their objections when surrounded by their peers who have accepted the messages. This kind of peer influence can lead to conformity, as dissenters risk being alienated or labeled unpatriotic. Public gatherings, collective rituals, and the use of mass media serve to create a sense of the majority's opinion, which pressures individuals to align with the propagated fear and nationalistic rhetoric. Modern technologies, such as social media, amplify the dissemination and impact of fear-based and nationalistic propaganda. The ability to spread information rapidly across global networks means that such messages can reach large audiences with unprecedented speed and frequency. As a result, the feedback loop between the propagandists and the audience is tightened, making it possible to adjust content in real time to resonate more deeply with prevailing fears and nationalistic sentiments. Digital platforms also allow for the targeting of messages to specific groups, refining the approach to energize or assuage particular segments of the population. The integration of fear and nationalism in propaganda is a deliberate strategy designed to elicit specific emotional and behavioral responses from the public. This manipulation of sentiments aims to consolidate power, justify policies, and suppress opposition. By understanding the ways in which these elements are used, individuals can better recognize propaganda efforts and maintain a critical stance against information intended to manipulate their perceptions and actions. 6.8 Censorship, Gatekeeping, and Information Control. Censorship, gatekeeping, and information control are among the most powerful tools in the arsenal of mass influence. Censorship refers to the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, and other media that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. Governments, corporations, and private entities may all engage in censorship. At its core, censorship impacts the dissemination of information. It removes or limits access to material deemed unfit by the censoring party, influencing public perception by omission rather than through overt persuasion. Gatekeeping is a related concept where a few individuals or organizations regulate the flow of information and decide what news or data reaches the public. This process can be seen in traditional media like television and newspapers, where editors and producers select stories to report, inherently shaping the narrative presented to viewers and readers. Gatekeeping extends beyond outright control and into the subtleties of emphasizing certain topics over others, thereby influencing the audience's perception of what is important or newsworthy. This leverage allows gatekeepers to indirectly shape public discourse and opinion. Information control is a broader term that encompasses both censorship and gatekeeping. It involves a deliberate effort to manipulate and control the distribution and access to information to influence public opinion or the outcome of an event. Information control can take many forms, from the propagation of certain narratives to the restriction of opposing viewpoints. Social media algorithms that curate content for users are a modern example of information control that can create echo chambers, where users are primarily exposed to information that conforms to their existing beliefs. Historically, censorship, gatekeeping, and information control have been powerful tools of propaganda, especially in authoritarian regimes. By controlling what information the public receives, propagandists can suppress dissent, promote a particular political agenda, and maintain power. In these contexts, censorship becomes a means to prevent the spread of information that could provoke questioning or undermine the authority of the ruling party, while gatekeeping focuses on creating a narrative that supports the regime's goals. In democratic societies, while freedom of speech is more robustly protected, there are still examples of censorship and gatekeeping. Censorship may occur for reasons such as national security, the prevention of hate speech, or the protection of children from harmful material. While these reasons can certainly be legitimate, the implementation of censorship can also be contentious, as decisions about what constitutes unacceptable material can be subjective and potentially open to abuse. The advent of the Internet has significantly altered the landscape of information control. Digital gatekeeping and censorship are more complex due to the vastness of content available online. Governments may attempt to restrict access to certain websites or online services within their territories, and tech companies can influence public discourse through their content moderation policies and algorithms. The spread of misinformation and fake news has further complicated the issue, leading to calls for censorship and content moderation to prevent harm. Social media platforms have become modern gatekeepers, with the power to shape societal dialogue through complex algorithms and content moderation policies. These platforms can downplay or amplify messages, potentially impacting elections, public sentiment, and even financial markets. Their role in information control is immense, and yet they often operate in an opaque manner with limited oversight. The ethical implications of censorship, gatekeeping, and information control are substantial. While these practices can protect society from harm, they can also serve to oppress alternative viewpoints and limit freedom of expression. It is essential to strike a balance between protecting citizens and preserving the open exchange of ideas that is fundamental to a healthy democracy. Moreover, the flow of information is not only governed by what is censored or allowed through gatekeeping, but also by the sheer volume of information available, which can itself be a form of control. Information overload can desensitize the public to important issues and dilute critical discourse, as the audience may struggle to distinguish what is significant amidst a sea of constant news and data. Censorship, gatekeeping, and information control play pivotal roles in shaping societal perspectives and public debate. While these practices are often justified by the need to protect the public or ensure security, they can also unduly influence public opinion, stifle dissent, and disrupt the democratic process. It is vital for citizens, institutions, and regulators to be vigilant about these practices and to seek a balance that upholds freedoms while responsibly managing information flow. The effective management of these tools is a dynamic challenge that continues to evolve, especially in the digital age. 6.9 Astroturfing and the creation of fake movements. Astroturfing is a tactic used in propaganda and mass influence campaigns, characterized by efforts to create an impression of widespread grassroots support for a particular cause, policy, or candidate, where little such support actually exists. It is named after AstroTurf, a brand of synthetic carpet designed to resemble natural grass, symbolizing the false reality it attempts to portray. The main purpose of astroturfing is to fabricate a movement so convincing that it influences real public opinion and obscures the artificiality and influencing agents behind it. Organizations, political groups, corporations, or individuals with the necessary resources can orchestrate such operations using various tools and strategies to manipulate public perception and discourse. Astroturfing campaigns often begin by setting up seemingly independent organizations or groups. These entities are designed to give the impression that they represent a collective voice with a specific concern or passion. Despite appearing to operate independently, these organizations are often funded by and operate at the behest of larger, more influential groups or interests. The strategic use of such front groups allows for the concealment of the true sources of advocacy, making the manufactured movement appear organic and obscuring the vested interests at play. An essential part of astroturfing is the use of social media and other online platforms, which provide a fertile environment for the rapid spread of disinformation. Social media bots, automated accounts that can mimic human interaction, can inflate the appearance of engagement, endorsements, and discussions. They can create a facade of popularity and consensus that may not exist. Additionally, astroturfing relies on the strategic use of hashtags, content creation, and the dissemination of memes and emotionally charged rhetoric to infiltrate online communities and influence the larger public conversation. Paid actors and influencers often play roles in astroturfing campaigns. These individuals can participate in demonstrations, provide testimonials, write opinion pieces, and engage in other activities that lend credibility to the astroturfed cause. Their involvement is usually disguised to prevent audiences from recognizing the artificial nature of their support. Moreover, their endorsements can carry weight and influence real individuals, further contributing to the false impression of a genuine grassroots movement. Another cornerstone of astroturfing is the generation of artificial media coverage. By establishing relationships with journalists, utilizing press releases, and creating pseudo-news websites, orchestrators of astroturf campaigns can simulate a media buzz around their causes. The creation of counterfeit news stories serves to legitimize the astroturf movement, and can even deceive legitimate media outlets into covering the story as if it were a real development, thereby amplifying the intended message. Sophisticated astroturfing campaigns can have significant impacts on public policy and perception. One of the dangers lies in its ability to drown out genuine public discourse, replacing it with controlled and manipulated narratives. This influence can shift the focus of political debate, influence legislation, and even affect the outcome of elections. Through the illusion of widespread support, policymakers may be swayed to make decisions based on what they perceive as the will of the people, even if that will is artificially manufactured. Astroturfing can be particularly impactful when it leverages existing societal divides or emotional triggers. By amplifying sentiments that resonate with certain demographics, astroturfers can mobilize individuals to action, potentially stoking civil unrest or sowing discord. This exploitation of societal fault lines is not only deceptive but also potentially dangerous, as it can lead to an escalation of tensions and a deepening of division. To combat astroturfing, it is crucial for individuals to develop a critical eye toward the information they consume and the origins of the movements they support. Educational initiatives must aim to improve media literacy, enabling people to distinguish between authentic, grassroots activism and manufactured movements. This education should include the critical analysis of sources, the questioning of sudden shifts in public discourse, and the understanding of the common techniques used in astroturfing. Legislative responses can also play a role in countering the effects of astroturfing. Regulations that demand transparency in funding and affiliations of advocacy groups especially in political advertising, can reduce the anonymity that allows astroturfing to thrive. Holding social media platforms and online spaces accountable for the content they disseminate may similarly limit the spread of such orchestrated campaigns. Overall, astroturfing represents a challenge to the integrity of democratic processes and public discourse. By creating the illusion of widespread support, it undermines the very foundation of democratic decision-making based on a well-informed public. Awareness and proactive measures are essential in safeguarding the authenticity of public debate and ensuring that the genuine voices of citizens are heard and not overshadowed by synthetic movements with hidden agendas. The fight against astroturfing is ongoing, requiring vigilance from all sectors of society, individuals, organizations, media, and governments to uphold the principles of transparency and truth in public life. 6.10. Counterpropaganda and critical thinking skills. In order to effectively discuss counterpropaganda and the development of critical thinking skills, it is fundamental to understand the essence of propaganda. Propaganda refers to the systematic dissemination of information, facts, arguments, rumors, half-truths, or lies to influence public opinion or promote a specific agenda. Invariably, propaganda harnesses emotional triggers rather than rational arguments to persuade mass audiences. This fact underlines the need for counterpropaganda, efforts designed to neutralize misleading information and encourage more discerning consumption of media. Counterpropaganda is not merely concerned with debunking false claims, but also with fostering an environment where critical thought can flourish. Critical thinking is integral to counterpropaganda efforts, as it enables individuals to analyze, evaluate, and synthesize information methodically. It requires an active approach to knowledge acquisition, rejecting passive acceptance in favor of inquiry and investigation. Critical thinkers question the credibility of sources, identify biases, examine the motives behind information, and assess the logical structure of arguments. This method of processing information serves as the first line of defense against propaganda. While critical thinking must be learned and practiced, its benefits are vast and valuable, making it a skill worth cultivating in all individuals in a society continually bombarded with information. In order to develop critical thinking skills as a countermeasure to propaganda, educational systems play a critical role. Effective education should not only transfer knowledge but also teach students how to think rather than what to think. It involves encouraging curiosity, fostering debate, and teaching logical reasoning and argumentation. Educators should present learners with diverse perspectives and complexities in issues, helping them to consider multiple viewpoints before forming conclusions. Such an environment discourages binary thinking and enables students to recognize the shades of gray in most arguments. Including consistent evaluation exercises and discussions on current events in curriculums can significantly enhance students' critical faculties. Media literacy is another essential component of counterpropaganda. In a world saturated with a vast array of media sources, the ability to critically assess and interpret the media's messages is crucial. It includes an understanding of the media landscape, the economic and political factors that shape content, the strategies employed to attract and retain attention, and the ways in which media can distort or emphasize certain messages. Media literacy education helps individuals discern reliable sources from questionable ones and equips them with the tools to decode the various tactics used by propagandists. Therefore, campaigns to promote media literacy are an essential stride in building resistance against propaganda. When addressing counterpropaganda and fostering critical thinking, it is imperative to emphasize the importance of intellectual humility. Recognizing the limits of one's knowledge and being open to new evidence even when it contradicts personal beliefs is a hallmark of a critical thinker. Intellectual humility allows for the possibility of error and promotes the ongoing search for truth. Instead of clinging to preconceived ideas, individuals learn to adapt their thinking based on new information and a better understanding of the facts. This quality is particularly vital in a polarized society where dogmatic adherence to ideologies can render people susceptible to manipulation through propaganda. Utilizing technology to facilitate counter-propaganda measures is another avenue worth exploring. In the digital age, advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning provide tools that can identify and flag potentially propagandistic content. Technology platforms can develop algorithms that prioritize credible information and sources that demonstrate a track record of accuracy. However, this approach relies heavily on the ethical use of technology and the impartiality of those who program and control it. When implemented carefully, such tools can complement the critical faculties of users by providing them with additional layers of verification. Counter-propaganda also involves proactive dissemination of accurate, balanced, and comprehensive information. Governments, institutions, and organizations must practice transparency and accountability to build trust with the public. Such entities should communicate in clear, accessible language, provide evidence for claims, and be receptive to scrutiny and correction. Establishing direct channels of communication with the public can prevent the spread of misinformation and help to maintain a dialogue built on facts rather than spin. This transparency not only informs but also empowers individuals to make better, more informed decisions. At an individual level, developing a habit of reflective skepticism is an effective counter-propaganda skill. This does not involve cynicism or distrusting every piece of information encountered. Instead, it is a balanced approach where individuals learn to temporarily withhold judgment and contemplate the validity of new information based on evidence and reasoning. Reflective skepticism encourages a deeper understanding of issues and fosters the ability to differentiate between emotional reactions and logical assessments. This practice becomes particularly important in contexts where emotional appeals are commonly employed as persuasive tools. Community engagement is another effective strategy that supports counter-propaganda efforts. Community forums, discussion groups, and public debates provide platforms for collective scrutiny of propaganda tactics. These forums allow individuals to share perspectives, challenge assumptions, and collaboratively sift through biases and fallacies. Community participation enhances social cohesion and creates a culture of shared responsibility for discerning truth from falsehood. Moreover, social media networks and online communities can extend this engagement to larger audiences and provide a support system for those trying to navigate the complex media environment. Lastly, international cooperation on countering propaganda is crucial in the globalized world where information crosses borders instantaneously. Collaborative efforts between nations to develop best practices, share resources, and create universal standards for information integrity can bolster defense against cross-border propaganda. Such cooperation is particularly vital in combating state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. It requires a commitment from the international community to uphold the principles of accurate reporting, transparency, and ethical communication. Counter-propaganda and the nurturing of critical thinking skills are multifaceted endeavors requiring engagement at various levels of society. An educated populace, equipped with media literacy and reflective skepticism, formidably challenges the effectiveness of propaganda. Through education, transparency, community engagement, and international cooperation, society can build robust defenses against attempts at manipulation, ensuring a well-informed public capable of making decisions based on critical analysis rather than emotion or deception.